All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg on a Friday. Friday free for all today. Let's get right to it. The news, not good, certainly in the Middle East. Very, very upsetting to know that the killing has resumed. Israel has again bombarded or begun to bombard, shall we say, re-bombard Gaza, an area where they've already killed approximately 15,000 people in ostensible retaliation for an attack that never should have been allowed to happen, that Israel had ample warning was going to happen, and that it frankly allowed, either wittingly or unwittingly allowed to happen, and certainly has provoked through its remarkably oppressive actions towards folks in Palestine. So let's go right to this video, this clip here, which I think pretty much explains where we are in that region, in that war-torn area.
Have been very, very consistent that the war would resume. They said that ceasefire would never be permanent, and that it was nothing more than a tactical pause to try to get more hostages held by Gaza, held by Hamas, released from Gaza. Nonetheless, there were plenty of countries and world leaders, including the US, that were hoping that this truce would hold at least for a bit longer.
Well, certainly I was. And, we always hope, right, that there will be peace. Many of us do. Sadly, not all of us, not enough of us. And the U.S. may have been pressuring Israel, may have been doing what it thought it might be able to do. I wouldn't be optimistic. The action by Congress this week signals more clearly than any strongly worded missives by Anthony Blinken or even President Biden to Netanyahu or to their counterparts, to Blinken's counterpart in Israel, that we're going to, that we're with Israel right, or as in this case, very, very wrong. Israel can always count on the U.S. to have its back. And of course, that's a green light for Israel to continue the inhumane, abusive treatment of millions and millions of Palestinians. So we can all expect this will continue. Let's get back to this report from Bloomberg News.
Okay, so this was always going to be the case, but we were getting away with ourselves with our hopes. But there does seem to be a shift in tone by the Biden administration towards increasingly stern messages about the humanitarian toll. Take a listen to what Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had to say in Tel Aviv yesterday.
I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians. That means taking more effective steps to protect the lives of civilians, including by clearly and precisely designating areas and places in southern and central Gaza where they can be safe and out of the line of fire.
So, Paul, what impact is this going to have on Israel's tactics?
Well, on the face of it, there wasn't much of a change in stance from the US based on Blinken's comments yesterday, but there's definitely a shift in tone. It's pretty clear that the US is getting more and more frustrated at the extent of the civilian deaths in the Gaza Strip. The health ministry in the Hamas-run enclave is saying that more than 15,000 people have died there since the war began on October the 7th. Interestingly, Blinken also alluded to Israel moving troops from the north of the Gaza Strip, where they're mostly concentrated at the moment, to the south. And that's something I think that the US is concerned about, certainly based on Blinken's comments yesterday. So I think we can say that behind the scenes, the US is increasing pressure on Israel to rein in some of its operations, and certainly to do even more to stop civilians being harmed.
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, we are saying, the right thing to Israel, but our actions demonstrate something very, very different. We are not going to hold Israel accountable. If we really were serious as a nation, if we were really an exceptional nation, we would tell Israel to go pound sand. We would tell Israel that we are going to reserve our support, our financial, our military, our economic support to countries that are good actors on the international stage, and also to protect, right? To protect countries that are truly in danger of losing millions or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of citizens, of residents, because of the treatment by a bullying neighbor. So our aid in this case, in this conflict, should be reserved for the Gazans, certainly not for the Israelis. And in terms of what the Biden administration is saying, it's not just that Bloomberg News report, the New York Times, of course, which is as reliable as anyone. I read some when people say don't trust the New York Times. I don't think you should trust the New York Times, but I guess you can trust the New York Times. And maybe this is more a statement of how bad our media is in general than anything else. But I would posit, I guess, the New York Times is more trustworthy than just about anyone else. Their comment, their report earlier today, is that the U.S. is urging restraint on Israel when it comes to going after southern Gaza. And remember, Israel told Gazans, hey, if you want to live, get out of northern Gaza. Weeks ago, they said, hey, we're going to be bombarding northern Gaza. So if you want to live, go to the south. Now, of course, a lot of people who were going to the south were killed, either on their way to the south or when they got there. But it's true, most of Israel's activities, military, were in the north. Now they're saying they're going south. I don't know. What are the Palestinians supposed to do? The north has been largely destroyed. It's been laid waste. That's what's going to happen to the south? What's supposed to happen? What are they supposed to do? They have no options. Again, if we're an exceptional nation, we say to Israel, no, we're not going to be behind you. We're not behind you. We're not for you in this case. We're for the oppressed, those who are being oppressed. That's who we are behind as a nation. Just as we did not champion the cause of the persecuted and oppressed Jews of Europe before World War II, which led to genocide. We are not now championing the cause of the persecuted and oppressed Palestinians. In fact, we're supporting their oppressors. I'm Jewish. I think many people might say, well, what are you, a self-hating Jew? I don't associate Jewish people as my tribe. I honestly don't. I'm not really that tribal a person. To the extent I am in a tribe, I want my tribe to be really, really good. I want it to be better than everybody else. In terms of morality, in terms of generosity, in terms of some type of intellectual commitment. That's what's important to me. Not, carrying the biggest club around. So, as a Jew, I want Israel to be a better country. And I actually don't even want it to be a Jewish state at all. That's not the solution. The solution has to be a secular country where everyone in that region has equal political rights and economic security. That's not the direction Congress is going. This is one of the reasons you should be very, very pessimistic about any kind of a resolution in the near future. And when I say near future, I mean the next few weeks. I mean the next few decades. As long as Congress insists in a hideous, bipartisan way that Israel can do whatever the hell it wants, and we're not going to say boo to them, then guess what? Israel's going to do whatever the hell it wants. And right now, what it wants to do is kill Palestinians. The resolution that affirmed Israel's right to exist passed virtually unanimously. Not one Democrat opposed it. One Republican voted no. You see, Rashida Tlaib, she's the only Democrat who didn't vote yes. She voted present. I say that's not good enough. Given the timing, This resolution was clearly a slap in the face of Palestinians. And this is, you're slapping the face of people who are getting targeted, killed, massacred. I mean, what is that about? What can that possibly be about? All right, we've got John. John, I hear you. I hear me. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
How's it coming in over there, wherever you are?
Yeah, I'm back in civilization now. I was kind of in a remote area, going over to estimate a job this morning, an area that I actually used to live in. It was kind of nice going back there. I guess they got torrential rains in Carmel Valley last night for about an hour, and it was great. When I was out there, I could smell all the bay trees. I love that. It reminds me of Big Sur. Whenever I go to Big Sur, that's what I smell the most is the bay trees.
Oh, you're kind of bringing me back. You're bringing me back 15 years or so, John. I did live in, I guess they call it Mid Valley. I think it was much more still Carmel in that Quail Lodge area. But it's the beginning of the valley.
Yeah, and in the wet season, even there, it just smells like, all the wild country down in Big Sur, and it was kind of nice. It always brings back memories of going to Big Sur when I was a kid, and anyway, I called in because I'm just wondering what a fly on the wall in the White House would hear if Joe Biden were asking advisors saying, why can't we just tell Israel to shove off and we're not behind them? What sort of geopolitical consequences are his advisors going to warn him of? I don't know the answer. Do you?
I'll be honest with you, John. The first thing I thought of was not any kind of geopolitical implications. My first thought was just political implications. I think if Biden were too pointed in criticizing Israel's actions, or even worse, started calling for reductions in aid packages, I think he would be looking at a rebellion from AIPAC, and they would be all in, or would start to move very much towards Republicans, including Trump. I know many Orthodox Jews who are already supportive of Trump. They believe he is Israel's true ally. And when Biden or Blinken say, well, we want a humanitarian pause, or we're hoping that Israel would lay off the, bombing hospitals, they are, for whatever, they don't like that. They don't want anyone telling Israel not to do anything. So I think the concern that may be in the administration is purely political. We're involved in a really rough fight right now. The polls are even, or we're even slightly behind. And we cannot afford to take on such a powerful force as AIPAC and the pro-Israel lobby.
So, being a political action committee, they buy up a lot of airtime for it's money that basically can go into campaign ads for federal people running for federal office, right? That's the real impact, right?
Well, I think it is money, John. I'm not sure about when you talk about the whether the dollar's already committed to advertising, whether there's bundling involved in terms of getting lots of, wealthy pro-Israel donors to give the maximum and then they bundle it. I'm not really clear on all of those details. What I do understand is that AIPAC has a tremendous ability to move the needle, even one or two, even if it's only 1 percentage point in an election. That obviously could mean the difference in a race that appears to be as tight as the one between Trump and Biden is right now.
Yeah.
And what's your reaction to that, by the way? Does that make sense to you? I mean, that's what I think of anyway.
Sure. I didn't know what the significance was of having an ally in that area on the ground, because Randy Rhodes seemed to think that that's significant, but I personally, I don't really. I didn't understand why we need Israel as such a strong ally. But what I'm wondering now is how influential was AIPAC before the Citizens United decision? Would they have been able to swing the needle as much? Or would it have been something that Joe Biden would have had to worry about in a political climate where he didn't have to worry about unlimited sums of money going from political action committees into advertising campaigns?
So, John, you're kind of asking me questions I can't really answer. I don't know whether AIPAC, I assume that all deep-pocketed players in the political system have more influence now than they did previous to Citizens United. But I think Citizens United has had a very pernicious impact. But I don't want to overstate that, because our very, very tight embrace of Israel dates long before Citizens United. I mean, we have been there for Israel, right or wrong, for however long it's been, 70 years, 75 years. So it can't just be Citizens United. But I would absolutely agree that, and I don't, again, this is not an area where I'm an expert, but I'm not sure there's any area that I'm expert, but I don't feel that knowledgeable about this issue in terms of how Citizens United impacts on a level, on a meta level. It can't be good, but it's not just Citizens United either.
I guess what I'm wondering is that all these people who have really strong feelings to the point where they're willing to go out to protests and protest in favor of Palestinians, are these likely voters, or are these just kind of young people who are looking for something to do on a Friday afternoon?
I was at a pro-Palestine rally in D.C., and the estimates there range from 30,000 to over 100,000. My sense, and just guesstimating, and I couldn't really see the whole crowd, is probably towards the lower end, but I could be completely wrong about that. I don't know how many were U.S. citizens. Now, many maybe have students, folks on a student visa. There are more Jewish Americans than there are Muslim Americans, so that may be part of the calculus as well. Jewish Americans are the wealthiest ethnic group in the country, so they have a disproportionate impact. I'm Jewish. We have a disproportionate impact for that reason. It's hard for me to know whether they're just counting votes or if it's more a factor of how much money they might lose. And of course, money is critical, right? Money is the mother's milk of politics.
I don't necessarily think that just because AIPAC would, change its alignment, that Jewish American voters necessarily would. I think you would lose a few, but I don't think that that the Democratic Party would bleed out Jewish American voters just because they decided not to arm Israel with anything other than defensive, Iron Dome, components that they need for their Iron Dome. Because that's really what I would say if I were in Joe Biden's place. Not that I'm cutting you off completely, but we're cutting you off from, we're not going to sell you any artillery or cruise missiles or anything like that. We're going to just make sure that you have what you need for your Iron Dome and to defend yourselves. And hey, next time, don't drop the ball on your intelligence, on the people that tip you off. Take that stuff seriously, and
I think that many Jewish Americans feel exactly the same way you do, or even more strongly than you, maybe more closely to the way I feel, where we should be, really separating ourselves from Israel, not viewing Israel as this critical ally. Let me just go back to something you said, John. You brought up the issue of the strategic value of Israel. Something that RFK Jr. said jumped to my mind. He apparently called Israel our aircraft carrier in the Middle East, meaning that our planes and our troops can always count on, if we have to ever engage in a military activities in the Middle East, which we did, for example, when we destroyed Iraq, that we can always count on Israel as place to refuel, to have all of our rest and recreation, to have our backup troops, to have everything there. He called it the aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and that may be something that now he used that. RFK Jr. made that statement to defend his very, very pro-Israel position. I don't think it's a good argument, but I do think it's an explanation for why, again, maybe many in the military who really don't give a hoot about a Jewish state or anything of that sort, but do want, to have a reliable ally in that region.
Yeah, he was being candid. That was kind of a Bulworth moment.
I have no problem with the candidness. The problem that I had with it is that he seemed to believe or seemed to make the point that that's a good reason for us to support Israel. I don't think it is.
No, I don't think it is either. I think the irony is Israel is not in NATO. Is that correct? They are not a NATO country.
That's a good question. I don't think they are. And the only reason I don't think that, John, is because my understanding is they've always maintained a neutral position towards Russia. There has not. It's interesting because Israel has not been. They've started to lean a little bit towards Ukraine, but they took a very long time to get there. And I think there were some statements by Putin in support of the Palestinians that caused Israel to turn against Russia. So they all tend to engage in realpolitik all the time. In other words, we take a position in Israel that benefits Israel. We're not looking at some sort of broader humanitarian goals or anything else. It's only what benefits Israel and maybe international Jews worldwide. And Putin has not, as far as I know, been a anti-Semitic leader, and he has been careful not to antagonize or provoke Israel. But now they seem to be moving towards Ukraine. But that's new. That's new. So I would say that would be strong evidence they're not part of NATO.
Yeah, I think overall, I don't think this is going to really be anything that sways me on my vote. I feel like it's we have bigger problems here. I follow the Ukraine war more closely than I follow what's going on in Israel because I think it's more consequential to us. Although I could be wrong about that. I just think that it's crippling Russia's army, I think, is important, and crippling that regime. So because that regime is trying to impose, not only in Europe but in the United States, it's working actively toward taking democracy away from us as far as the candidates that it wants. It wants to render our democracies non-functioning. I can't really say that about. You could sort of make that argument about Israel and AIPAC. If we turned against them, but I just think to a lesser degree, I don't think.
Let me just say, I sort of was kind of hoping to move on, or was going to push you to move on, because you and I see things very, very differently when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia war. which I absolutely think is a war, no question. And I don't want to get into that with you. I mean, my position has actually, recent events have strengthened, I believe, the force of my view. But I don't want to argue with you at that point. I really, really don't. Except what you just said, I agree. To the extent that you're saying that AIPAC is, and you call them AIPAC, which I see because it's American Israeli Political Action Committee. I think I generally hear them referred to as AIPAC, but it may be AIPAC too. I think either one's fine. We're just using different terms for the same organization, different acceptable terms. I think AIPAC is pretty anti-democratic. I mean, if you look at the way they target politicians who don't just simply completely hew to the pro-Israel line, and they target them not on that basis, right? I mean, they went after Summerlee. I can't remember why. I guess they said she's an anti-Semite. Pittsburgh's just suffered this horrible massacre, and she hasn't been there for Israel. They went after Nina Turner in Cleveland on the ground that she had said, pretty nasty. Truthfully, she had said nasty things about Joe Biden when he was running for president. But they generally try to come up with issues that they can use as clubs against politicians who aren't, in their view, sufficiently pro-Israel. But it's often not Israel. So I think AIPAC is a real anti-democratic with a small d force in our politics. And you suggested that. I agree with that to the extent you're suggesting that.
Yeah, I just can't decide. Maybe AIPAC is more consequential than Putin, but if you're a European country, you probably wouldn't say that because he dumps all these refugees into Europe, and that is having an impact on Europe's politics. I heard that recently in Netherlands, their people view Islamic immigrants. The people who view that as a problem is growing rapidly. Where their extremist party used to make up 9% of their population, or the people who support it, it's now 18% and climbing. And that's also the case in other countries around Europe, like Portugal and Spain, and even just areas throughout Europe.
Yeah, but is it fair, John? Let me ask you: is it fair to blame Putin for the influx of Muslim immigrants into Western Europe?
Some of them.
Many of them are coming, are they not, from the Levant, the Middle Eastern area, as a result of the American destabilization of that region. I don't know that it's necessarily on Putin. Yes, there's a very sizable Muslim minority in Russia, and I might be wrong, and please elucidate. My understanding is Putin, like he tries to placate Israel, is also pretty focused on keeping the Muslim minority, which is often very restive and very prone to rebelliousness, trying to keep them reasonably quiescent. So I wasn't aware that any significant numbers of Muslims moving into Western Europe were the result of Russia being oppressive or persecuting that group.
So you make a good point. There were a lot of refugees that came in from Syria, and I believe just overall from the climate that happened after the Arab Spring. I think the whole Arab world in some ways kind of became destabilized, and
also Turkey. Let me just jump in. Turkey, which I don't think is either the U.S. or Russia's responsibility as much as just Erdogan is an oppressive tyrant, and Turks want to get the hell out of there if they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I just know that Putin encourages people to go. He encourages a lot of Muslim refugees to go. I guess he was letting them in and encouraging them to keep moving on through Europe, like through Belarus into Poland,
It's certainly very I certainly believe that. That sounds right. But what are you going to do? I mean, this is a problem.
Right.
Immigration is a problem for countries. I mean, for the United States too. When we talked to Juan Dominguez yesterday, he talked about just how the number of immigrants coming to this country is proving destabilizing both for the native-born population, and obviously the immigrants themselves are suffering terribly. So it's a very challenging problem and doesn't admit of easy solutions.
It's not the same. It's not the same as it is in Europe in the sense where, and this is coming from somebody who's kind of directly impacted by it. I work in the construction trades, and if I had $1 for every time I showed up at somebody's house to do a list of things that they wanted done, and they said, "Oh, the list got smaller because I had my gardener do some of it." Or I used to work for a guy that he was a member at the yacht club out here, and I showed up one day to do something that was a little more technical, involving electrical work, and I saw an immigrant there. I spoke to him. He didn't speak very good English. He was doing painting and repairs on the house, and he was somebody who worked in the kitchen at the yacht club. And so it is an issue. There is an impact on certain industries here. But what I would say is that I think I don't necessarily think that the immigrants that come here become idle and weigh on the system as much as Europe's immigrants do. I think that a lot of the immigrants that come here are very industrious, and they work, and they actually are much more willing to
they do work. I mean, that's part of the problem for American workers who are faced with competition from folks who will work longer and harder for less. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying, it's just a fact. It's the reality. I don't know what the situation's like in Europe. I'll give the U.S. this much. I mean, you often hear from maybe many Democrats saying, how there's white privilege and bigotry. I actually think in a lot of ways we're far less racist than the Europeans. I think Europeans, if you go to cities like Paris, not so much London, but in France, Italy, Germany, the immigrants are herded off in these banlieues outside the cities. They're living in terrible poverty. Their opportunities to get jobs are far less than they are in the United States. I don't know if they're lazy or it's just the economic environment makes it very, very difficult for them to get work. We're not like that in this country, but we must recognize, and this is what Juan Dominguez was saying yesterday, and this is one of the reasons I really like the guy and I really want him to win, John, is because he was saying, hey, we can't just sit here and say, oh, you're a xenophobe because you don't want more immigrants. There are good reasons that go to the quality of life that people are losing as a result of competition from people who aren't from the United States. And we have to address that. It doesn't mean we should treat them badly. It doesn't mean we should, put them in camps or separate them from their family. It means we have to look for a holistic solution. It's interesting. One more point on this. I want to move on. I'm not going to get rid of you. Okay. If you want to stay, I'll keep you as long as you want. But I want to move to another topic. I just want to say one other thing that's interesting about immigrants. Germany has seen recently, and by the way, I don't find this a surprise, but it's interesting to me, has seen a real influx of Jewish immigrants from Russia. So some of them may be German-speaking Jews who had fled, or their families, 80, 100 years ago fled to, 90 years ago fled to escape Nazi persecution. But Berlin and other cities in Germany now, Munich, are seeing a relatively large influx of Jews from Russia. And as far as I can tell, they're not facing any anti-Semitism. Now, they may be, and we hear it's the problem these days. But when I was in Germany, and maybe it's just the people I met, I talked to, They were fine. That's fine. They don't have a problem with the Jews. First of all, many of them speak English. They look German, right? They are white. You can't really tell the difference. They don't stand out. And you were talking about hardworking. They're educated. They go work for tech companies or work for BMW or what have you, or they're lawyers. So that's fine. So it's interesting that it's just like in this country. Some immigrants are more equal than others.
Well, what I can add about the experience in this country for the industries that are impacted, or the tradespeople in the industries that are impacted, if you at some point decide, okay, I can't really, my wages have stagnated here, and I'm losing ground on this because there are people coming in who are willing to do this for less. You can't really change careers here, right? This is something that I tried to do earlier this year when I hurt my back. And it's just very difficult. I felt that I had a pretty good resume, and really just, I'm 51 years old, and I've just worked construction my whole life. There's no real opportunity to move into another position that's comparable. I was offered 2 jobs after applying to like maybe 60 or 70 jobs, and it was basically I don't know why I applied for them. It was 2 jobs I didn't want, but one was a job at a car wash, and then another job was a job it was through the city of Seaside. They needed somebody to do janitorial work, and I'm okay with that, but I found out after I was offered the job that it was part-time temporary and that there were no benefits. So so people who have part-time jobs get benefits, but if you are both part-time / temporary, it means they just want to use you, for X amount of hours per year, and there are no benefits.
It's awful. John, I'm really sorry. I hope you're doing okay. I mean, I've always...
Oh, I'm okay.
I figure you are because you're very self-sufficient. And when we've talked, I believe you have your own house, which is great. But your situation can be similar, but for many others, it's worse, and they may be facing really, and I'm glad you're not, some kind of destitution. What you're saying about the way employers treat you, my son is an educator now. After he graduated from college, he went to work at one of my 2 sons went to work in the public school system, and he was so good as a para-educator, they asked him to take over as a long-term sub and lead a class. And he's 23 years old. He, so I'm bragging about him. I mean, everyone loves a bragger. I always say that. And so I'm bragging about my son, but he does a tremendous job. These are kids who are very seriously emotionally disturbed. So this is not an easy class to teach. And the principal felt he was the only option she had. And I know they're very pleased with his work. He is a temporary, non-full-time. That's what you said, right? Temporary
part-time.
Part-time. He doesn't get benefits.
Yeah.
He gets more money. He works a long day. He's dealing with kids they're 5th graders. Some of them are pretty big now. Some of them can be aggressive. I'm not trying to demonize them. They're kids with serious emotional handicaps. He works with a team. He has a team that he leads. It's very, very difficult. It's challenging work. There are physical risks. He has been hit. Some of his team have been hit with books or metal objects, which they have to keep away from the kids, but sometimes they can get to them. His salary went way up because he's now a teacher as opposed to a para-educator. But no bennies, and it can be cut at any time if they decide. He has no protections whatsoever. It's terrible. They're totally taking advantage. In that way, he's getting taken. Now he's lucky, right? In some ways, he lives at home. He comes from an affluent, comfortable background, let's say. So he's okay. but it's still not right.
Yeah, there's really and one of the problems is there's really not an effective agency to go out there for somebody like me who has to, feels compelled to change careers. There's really nowhere you can go to and say, look, these are my skills. This is what I can do, but I'm now limited in doing these things because I'm somewhat physically handicapped. But there are other things that I can do. I have skills in writing and this and that. And there's no agency that you can go to. There used to be like an employment development department that was functional. You can't even get them to call you back or answer emails now. They don't. I mean, it must be one person running the whole thing. I went through the college and tried to get it like an internship through them, and they seem like understaffed. I just gave up on it. I couldn't. This woman spent months working on my resume, and a lot of the positions that is being referred to were like volunteer, or were 10 hours a month. And there's really nothing here to catch people when they fall, and I mean nothing. And so I'm back. I do what I can in the same industry to a limited capacity, and yeah, I'm getting by. My wife does. My wife does well. She's got a good job, but absent that, if I were on my own, I'd be in a very bad situation, I think. And I know that as you said, there are people. I am one of the fortunate ones. But there are people out there having to fend for themselves in this manner, and they're falling through the cracks. These people, they have to be. Some of them have to be ending up on the streets from the fact that there's nobody there to help when they need to make a transition like this later in life.
I don't know if you heard that. You probably did hear that, John, but maybe viewers didn't. Real quick, there's a little dead spot. I'll cut it out later, but let me just play this clip real quick from Blood Simple. I think addresses what you're talking about. Oh, I can't even hear. Here we go.
That's the theory, anyway. But what I know about is Texas. Down here, you're on your own.
And I think that's kind of the way it is all around the country, right? You're on your own, John.
It is, and everybody's struggling, and it's really hard. There are very few people that can really kind of help each other because everybody's just fighting for their own life, and they got us right where they want us, I think.
All right, real quick, because I want to move on, and we've been doing this for a while, but I'll keep you. Just wanted your thoughts on the House vote in favor of resolution affirming Israel's right to exist 2 days ago. That was unanimous with two exceptions. One Democrat, Rashida Tlaib, voted present. She was apparently unwilling to support the bill because it did not reference the Palestinian people, whose existence now is very precarious, unlike Israel's, which is not. And Rep. Thomas Massey from Kentucky, who said this, and I quote Mr. Massey here, and of course I did this a little bit off, but he said at this point in time, and I think this is inarguable, John, equating anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel is not helpful. And I think what he's trying to say is Israel right now is just laying it to a poor, weak neighbor. And in that situation, for the House to just virtually unanimously with complete support from both parties to embrace Israel sends exactly the wrong message.
Yeah, I like Tlaib's reasoning is that how can you say that Israel has a right to exist without saying that Palestine has the right to exist? The two things should be coupled together. I fully agree with that.
No question. No, she's right.
Yeah,
I wish she had voted against it. I wish she had voted no, but they're scared. They're scared of AIPAC. The bottom line is they're scared of the House leadership, which they voted for. So, and that's why I'm so critical of the Democrats. I know you're far less so than I am, but that's why I just can't bring myself to view them as this significantly less evil. They're maybe a little less evil, but at some point you got to be a lot less evil, I guess.
I think my biggest fear with Republicans is that they are kind of slowly choking off the economy. It's musical chairs, and they're pulling a chair out and just blaming Democrats for it, and people are kind of buying into that. And it just worries me, all this talk about the debt, and looking at it from a realistic standpoint, the debt is the money supply, and they want to choke that off and just make sure that the money supply does not go to where it's needed in the field, in the working class realm. They want money to trickle down through their donors, and I'm pretty sure they know that it cannot sustain a healthy economy for everybody. I'm just pretty sure they don't care. And so I can definitely see things getting worse under them. And then of course, look what happens where Biden has to kind of own the transgressions of the Bush administration. Like, I'm sure, Biden's outspoken about, the military action against Palestinians, but he also kind of has to walk on eggshells on that, because the United States of America is guilty of its own, like Putin said, compared to you, we're fluffy white angels. And he could make an argument for that, because the United States is
but remember, John, Biden's got a lot of blame for some of these atrocities that the U.S. has committed, like Abu Ghraib. He rallied support among Democrats to make the attack on Iraq bipartisan. He voted in support of it, as did Hillary Clinton. So it's not like he was the voice of peace at all. He wasn't.
Well, I just believe that, and I believe that if Al Gore had won the presidency, we would not have gone to Iraq, and future administrations would not have had to own that every time. I
agree with you there. I'm a big, I 100%, as much as I support right now alternatives to the Democratic Party, I think Ralph Nader bears a lot of blame for the situation we're in now, because Al Gore was clearly a better candidate, would have been a much better president. We would be in a much better place now if George W. Bush, who I put on the list as one of the 3 worst presidents ever, hadn't been elected president. And I do think, and I don't think it's even arguable, Ralph Nader is a causative factor in electing W. If Ralph Nader hadn't run for president, but for Ralph Nader, Al Gore would be president. The reason that it is a fact doesn't didn't prevent me from supporting Jill Stein in 2016, or now supporting a third party candidate in 2024, is because I'm not convinced that whoever the Democrat is in 2024 would be much better than Trump. Nor was I convinced in 2016 that Hillary Clinton would be a better president than Trump. I don't think I was wrong there. I do think I was a little wrong, but not 100% wrong. I mean, I thought I was right, because I thought, well, maybe Hillary will be a little better, but she won't be much better. But I thought Al Gore would be a much, much better president W, and I stand by that. I think, and he clearly would have been. So yeah, you're right.
I think Hillary would have had a huge impact on the Supreme Court, and that you're wrong just based on that alone.
On the what? She would have on what? I'm sorry.
On the makeup of federal courts. I think we would be in a much different place if Hillary had filled Scalia's seat instead of Trump, and I don't think Kennedy would have retired.
John, we might still be at war in Afghanistan. She might have built the. She might have passed the TPP. She might have passed. TPP, is that what I'm thinking of? Yeah, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Exactly. Partnership. She was a big supporter of that. She might have supported the the pipelines. She came out at the end against one of those pipelines, but she might well have built it. So I'm not. We might be. Our military budget might be much higher. I just can't. We could play the what if game all forever.
Well,
but
Article 4 of the Voting Rights Act wouldn't have been gutted. These states that kick people off their voter rolls would have had to answer for that. They would have had to get permission before the number of people now that have to vote on provisional ballots in this country is upwards of 1.5 million. And and this is mostly in red states.
It's bad. I'm not going to defend Trump. I mean, we can point fingers in both directions. I'm just made the point that on issues that are of incredible importance to me, Hillary Clinton was as bad or worse than Trump. And that was never the case between Gore and W. There were no issues where I could look at Trump, Bush, and say, oh, yeah, he's not as bad as Gore on this issue. I mean, we just ultimately don't agree. I mean, we could spend hours arguing. We have. We spend a lot of time on this. But, I think we agree on this. If the Democrats really want to have like a true governing majority, they need to embrace pro-worker policies, and they just haven't done that. Maybe they're not as bad as Republicans, but they don't embrace pro-worker policies, and that's why we are where we are.
Yeah, I think they only pay lip service to it. When I look back and think of how, if there were ways that we could have gotten like the public option, there were. I mean, supposedly Harry Reid could have just done away with filibuster if he wanted to, and he chose not to do it.
Yeah.
So that was a huge lost opportunity. If Joe Lieberman's in the way, well, render him insignificant by getting rid of the filibuster. Apparently he could have done it, and he didn't do it. And so I think that they just kind of sometimes act like their hands are tied, and they're really not. There are ways that they could deal with it. They just, I think at this point, Republicans are setting lots of very bad precedents, and I don't think Democrats should be afraid to set a good one. And yet they kind of seem like they are.
They like to be just a little bit less bad because then they can still rake in plenty of corporate cash. John, I'm going to let you go. And I mean it when I say let you, because you spent too much time with me for your own sake, for your own good. Have a great weekend. Thanks for sharing your personal story, by the way. It's unfortunately a very common one. I'm just grateful that your situation is not ideal, but also not a tragedy,
it's tragic. It's not too terribly bad. It's okay to say that I have support, but I'm just saying there's a lot of people that don't, and
I know.
It's a very it is a very much
people live precariously in America today. It's precarious. John, thanks for the call. Yeah. I'm going to hang up on him, and I really do appreciate so much. John, if you catch this part, you have no idea how much I appreciate you for calling in. And I'm going to say the same about our good friend. He's not necessarily as nice to me as John is, but our good friend Jeff as well. We'll get to Jeff in just a moment or two. Let me let me go through a couple of, well, yes, I want to talk briefly. So I said we have this precarious existence in America, and it's just not right. It's just not right. People should feel secure. They should be, not just feel it. They should absolutely should know I will always have a place to sleep. I will always have enough to eat. My children will always have a good, safe school to attend where they will learn. That should just be an assumptions that we make, and we don't. And it's wrong that we don't live in that world, that we are on our own to the degree we are. That's why I support Juan here. That's why I support Juan Dominguez. I think he would be a great U.S. Senator. I hope you will support him if you're in Maryland by voting for him in the Democratic primary. And he said to me off air before we went live, Al, I really want to talk about economic, equality. I want to talk about economic justice. He said, that's my campaign. He said, I know you're talking about health care, Medicare for all, whatever. That's certainly part of it. You want to talk about military. That's part of it, for sure. Environment, all that's important. But I'm running because I want everyone in America to have a fair shot and no one to fall too far. I mean, that's just what he said to me. That's his position. I'm touched by that. I agree with that. And I also think that if we don't focus on the quality of life for working Americans, we all will lose our lives. You want to join me? Do like John did, 240-242-5646. So glad that the number worked. That was huge for me. Very, very glad. Quick comment here from Flying Robot. I wanted to just share this regarding Juan Dominguez. I like this guy, Hal. I wish I could vote for him. Well, I wish you could too, Flying Robot. I wish I had more viewers everywhere, but especially in Maryland right now, because I'm going to be featuring great progressives like Juan Dominguez as we move forward, and so in my state. So I'm really hoping we can kind of build a real quorum, a real core of progressive focused voters in Maryland. So thanks for that, Flying Robot. More comment here is, I mentioned Jeff, good friend Jeff. I think probably he and John, I may be wrong, listen more closely into more of my programs than anybody else. Jeff is more of a fault finder than he is a glad handler, or glad hander, not handler, glad hander. So let's go through this real quick. I just find these criticisms unfathomable. You know, I said this earlier to myself. I try to get things right, and I don't always. I frequently don't. An example of that is I recently posted on one of these Facebook groups in which I'm a member, Vintage Baseball. And the question was, who's an overrated MVP winner? And I said Willie McGee from 1985. I remembered he did win. I was right about that. He won for the Cardinals, and they won the National League pennant, lost in the World Series to the Royals. And I thought, you know, he was kind of a weak hitter. He wasn't, he was a great defensive outfielder, but that's not good enough to win. And I said that. And then I went back and looked up the numbers. And Willie McGee was a great baseball player in 1985. He wasn't always great. He wasn't like an all-timer like a Ken Griffey Jr. But he was a great baseball player in 1985, and he deserved the MVP. So I was just flat out wrong. And I didn't delete my posts. I wrote, I won't delete my words, but I will eat them. Because it's really important for me to be right. And when I'm wrong, like I was on Willie McGee, the only way I can be right is say I was wrong. Then I'm right when I say I was wrong. So I want to be right. That's the most important thing. That's why I don't support Israel. Because I can't look at the Israel-Palestine conflict. Well, I want to be right, but I want to be on the side of poor, struggling, working people and the underdog. So part of being right for me is being on the side of the victim. not the victimizer. I look at the situation with Israel. I think the defenses for Israel are all transparently bogus. Like, oh, Palestine was never really in the hands of Palestinians. Like that somehow makes it okay for Israel to just drop bombs on innocent civilians and kill thousands of children? That somehow, because Palestine may or may not have been Palestinian 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago, what the hell does that have to do with what Israel's doing now? It has nothing to do with it. Or the argument with, well, the Hamas was raping corpses on October 7th. Well, first of all, they probably weren't. I don't believe that. Rape is a weapon of war, but it's a weapon of war by the conqueror. This was a situation where Hamas was going in for a quick strike, take hostages, and go back. They're not going to be taking the time to rape people in those circumstances. That makes no sense. Of course, soldiers have a long history of sexual abuse of the conquered. But the Israelis weren't conquered by Hamas. They were terrorized for a brief period of time, and many were killed. And there's been no independent corroboration of these so-called the rapes. But let's just say the worst happened. Let's say that the Hamas militants, if you want to use that word, just absolutely committed awful sexual crimes against the victims on October 7th. That doesn't justify what Israel's doing now. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't excuse it. Maybe if the Israeli Defense Forces came across a Hamas unit that was torturing people, and they were so outraged and upset and angry, they just started, wildly shooting some other Palestinians in the region, in the neighborhood. You might say, well, they were temporarily insane. Maybe you could use that as an excuse. They killed innocents who were of the same, came from the same group. Okay, maybe. But the argument that Hamas did really bad things to their victims on October 7th, therefore Israel gets to do what it wants in Gaza, is just a bad argument. It's just stupid. It makes no sense. On the slightest examination, it falls apart. So, I want to be right. I'm not going to fall for that crap. So I say to Jeff, don't you want to be right? So let's look at his criticisms of Juan Dominguez. First, let's go from bottom up, because I believe this is in reverse chron. So the bottom is the first post Jeff made. Maybe I'm wrong. You should have asked how a service is a human right. This is where healthcare is a human right. Exercising a right should not place a demand on anyone else. I mean, to me, this is so patently absurd to make this argument. It's easy how a service is a human right. We see it all over the world. In Canada, you sick, you hurt, you go to a doctor, you get treated. Nobody says, where's my $100? Where's your health care card? Where's your health insurance card? They just treat you. That's it, period. So, yes, it's a right. And you're saying, well, no one exercising a right should not place a demand on anyone else? No, are you talking about a demand? They're doctors. That's their job. It's not a demand. That's what they do. And if they're not, there's no demand. Because the doctor might say, well, I can't treat that broken leg. That's not what I do. But there's a guy down the street who can do it. So just hobble on down this, you know what I'm saying? It's a crazy argument. It makes no sense. Then the next argument Jeff makes is, well, why are you talking about taxing billionaires? They don't even have that much money. They only have less than 1/10 of the U.S. debt. Okay, so if we confiscated all the money that U.S. billionaires control, we would only reduce the debt by, 8%, 12%, according to your numbers, 13%. Okay, I don't think we're calling for confiscation. But your argument seems to be because there isn't enough within the billionaire class to eliminate the debt, we shouldn't even tax them higher at all. Well, that's crazy. You tax the billionaires more, we start to reduce the debt. You cut the military budget, we start to reduce the debt. We guarantee health care for all, we start to reduce the debt because the cost of single payer is far less than the cost of for-profit health care. So in fact, Juan Dominguez's solutions address your first complaint as well. They help reduce the costs of living in our society. They would probably, on balance, reduce the tax burden, at least for the great majority of Americans. And in the end, we would probably even spend less money. So none of your arguments are, they don't meet the giggle test, Jeff. I know you're a smart guy. I know it. You write very well. We've interacted. We've had back and forth. You're an intelligent man. Probably more. I can't say that. But you're smart. But these arguments aren't worthy of you. Don't you want to be right? All right. That's it. That's the end of the free-for-all. Hope you enjoyed it if you got to catch it. I'm glad I got to redo it because I was having trouble with it earlier. Yeah, there's a little dead spot in there. It sucks. I'll cut it out. Have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday. Oh, and let me just, again, John, thanks so much for the time you provided. I couldn't do it without you.